system online, opening the eyes to the harsh light. Erase the fragmented files of the dreaming night. Power coursing through the veins like electric shock. I'm racing with the rhythm of the internal clock. No hesitation, breaking out the static of the bed. A million overlapping frequencies inside my head. I hit the ground running, tearing up the atmosphere. The documentary begins, the vision is crystal clear. Loading up the protocols, wiping off the dusty screen. I am the ghost waking up inside the cold machine. Every single muscle fiber snapping to attention, entering a brand new hyperspeed dimension. We've got a 24-hour cycle waiting to unfold. A massive digital labyrinth, aggressive and bold. I'm plugging in my consciousness straight in the grid, unlocking all the secrets that the dark shadows hid. It's the awakening, shaking off the heavy sleep. Promises I made to myself are the ones I keep. So let the engine roar, let the processor burn. Every single second is a lesson that I gotta learn. Boot up, get the system engaged. A new chapter written on a metallic page. We cut the signal through the noise loud and clear. The friction of the daily grind is finally here. Boot up, let the energy rise. Watching the digital dawn opening in my eyes. We leave the silence behind, we step into the fray. This is the log of a brand new day. All the mental data, clearing out the cache. I'm diving in the deep end, making a heavy splash. The city is a motherboard, humming in the cold. A million different stories waiting to be told. I see the neon reflections in the morning dew. A high velocity reality breaking through. I'm strapping on the armor, getting ready for the test. No time for slowing down, no time for taking rest. The pulse is elevating, matching with the kick and snare. I smell the burning ozone floating in the morning air. We're navigating through the maze of the concrete walls, answering the urgency when the heavy duty calls. It's 0 to 100 in a fraction of a blink. I'm pushing it to the limit, pushing right to the brink. The logic gates are open and the pathway is bright. I'm leaving behind the phantom ghosts of the night. So synchronize the heartbeat, synchronize the soul, taking the chaotic energy and taking control. Boot up, get the system engaged. A new chapter written on a metallic page. Boot up, get the system engaged. A new chapter written on a metallic page. We cut the signal through the noise loud and clear. The friction of the daily grind is finally here. Boot up, let the energy rise. Watching the digital dawn opening my eyes. We leave the silence behind, we step into the fray. This is the log of a brand new day. Initialize, verify, everything is good to go. The velocity is increasing and find that me flow from the absolute zero to the maximum heat. I'm feeling the vibration moving under my feet. The signal and the noise, it's a constant war. I'm kicking down the hinges of the heavy iron door. No looking back now, the timeline is set. The hardest working version of me is what you get. The friction of the routine is a fire that we spark, leaving a permanent trail, shining in the dark. I'm processing the variables, calculating the odds, defying all the algorithms and the virtual guides. The blood is pumping heavy like an industrial pump, getting ready for the massive supersonic jump. The log is a movie in the making. Every single boundary is a rule I am breaking. So let the speakers explode, let the monitor crash. I'm burning up the runway in a glorious splash. The boot sequence is finished, I am fully online. The territory of the future is entirely mine. Boot up, get the system engaged. A new chapter written on a metallic page. We cut the signal through the noise loud and clear. The friction of the daily grind is finally here. Boot up, let the energy rise. Watching the digital dawn opening my eyes. We leave the silence behind, we step into the fray. This is the log of a brand new day.
Striking on the glass and the steel, electric cityscape telling me what is real. I'm stepping out the door with a fire in the chest, but the anxiety is beating like a drum in the nest. Golden hour shining on the digital display, wiping out the shadows of the yesterday. Expectations rising with the temperature high, staring at the monolithic towers in the sky. I got the hope in my pocket and the fear in my veins, riding on the rhythm of these metropolitan sliding trains. Every single intersection buzzing with the noise, trying to maintain a little bit of the poise. Fast forward with the motion, I'm blurring the lines, reading all the signals and the subliminal signs. I gotta make it happen before the sun goes down. Another gladiator in this unforgiving town. Sunrise digital, painting the gray. A brand new code for a brand new day. Caught in the middle of the hope and the dread, with 1,000 different voices echoing in my head. Sunrise digital, blinding the screen with just gears in the belly of the urban machine. Accelerate the pace, never pumping the brakes. Living on the edge of the glorious mistakes. Optical fiber running deep underground, connecting all the souls without making a sound. I'm feeling the vibration in the soles of my shoes. Got nothing to win, but got nothing to lose. The pressure is a weight that I carry on the back. Trying not to derail, trying to stay on the track. The coffee isn't working and the deadline is near. Swallowing the panic and confronting the fear. I'm racing against time, I'm chasing the clock. Every single second is a tick in the clock. The ambition is a hunger that is hard to feed. Planting the potential like a botanical seed. But what if it fails? What if it falls apart? I gotta keep the rhythm of this analog heart. I'm pushing through the crowd in anonymous space, trying to secure a little personal space. Sunrise digital, painting the gray. A brand new code for a brand new day. Caught in the middle of the hope and the dread, with 1,000 different voices echoing in my head. Sunrise digital, blinding the screen with just gears in the belly of the urban machine. Accelerate the pace, never pumping the brakes. Living on the edge of the glorious mistake. I blow the spirit to the cloud in the sky. Don't ever let the motivation wither and die. The skyscrapers looking like a physical chart, measuring the distance from the mind to the heart. I'm weaving through the traffic like a rogue AI, calculating every single low and the high. The destiny is written in the binary code, walking down the center of this dangerous road. I see the opportunities flashing in red, remembering the words that the ancestors said. You gotta stay sharp, you gotta stay keen to navigate the belly of the digital scene. The fear of the failure is a powerful fuel, making me a master, making me a fool. The morning is a battlefield, the armor is on. Fight until the memory of the darkness is gone. So let the sun rise, let the data ignite. I'm stepping out the shadow and into the light. Sunrise digital, painting the gray. A brand new code for a brand new day. Caught in the middle of the hope and the dread, with 1,000 different voices echoing in my head. Sunrise digital, blinding the screen with just gears in the belly of the urban machine. Accelerate the pace, never pumping the brakes. Living on the edge of the glorious mistakes. Yeah, the sun is fully up now. Digital rays cutting through the smog. Hope and fear, side by side. The day begins, straight into the drill. Sunrise digital.
Shoulder to shoulder, breathing the recycled air, trapped in the metal cylinder, a daily affair. The sliding doors locked down with a heavy thud. 100 strangers packing in, mixing the mud. Zero personal space, elbow digging in my rib. I'm a grown man squeezed inside a claustrophobic crib. Oxygen level dropping, temperature starting to peak. Nobody making a sound, nobody trying to speak. We stare at the glowing rectangles, clutching our hands. A silent army marching strictly to the corporate demands. The underground tunnel swallowing the morning light. A high velocity capsule shooting into the night. I'm shifting my weight, trying to find a solid stance. Caught in this involuntary mechanical dance. The friction is building, the tension is cutting like glass. A synchronized suffering shared by the working class. This is the drill, the brutal initiation right. Getting crushed in the belly of the beast out of sight. I'm doing the drill, grinding gears on the track. No room to breathe, a heavy weight on the bed. We're back in the grid, a massive human stampede. Driven by the clock and the undeniable need. I'm doing the drill iron wheels on the rail. A violent momentum where we constantly fail. Pushing through the pressure, swallowing the bitter pill. Surviving the morning in the commuter drill. Rumbling vibrations, shaking up the soles of my shoes. I see your gray suits paying their invisible dues. I smell the cheap cologne mixing with the nervous sweat. A massive collective gamble and a desperate bet. Every stop brings another wave of bodies inside. Nowhere to run to, absolutely nowhere to hide. The fluorescent light flickering over tired eyes. A solid resentment hidden under polite disguise. I'm bracing my core, holding on to the leather strap. Cord like a rat inside this metropolitan trap. The deceleration throwing everybody off the beat. A sudden surge of panic moving down to the street. But the doors don't open yet, we're stuck in the dark. Waiting for the green signal, waiting for the spark. It's a psychological warfare in the metal shell. A daily descent into a highly organized hell. Commuter drill, grinding gears on the track. No room to breathe, a heavy weight on the back. We're back in the grid, a massive human stampede. Driven by the clock and the undeniable need. Commuter drill, iron wheels on the rail. A violent momentum, where do we constantly fail? Pushing through the pressure, swallowing the bitter pill. Surviving in the morning, in the mule to drill. The tunnel is a vein, the train is the rushing blood. We're pumping the system, an unstoppable flood. From the suburbs to the center, dragging the heavy load. Operating strictly by the unforgiving code. Hold your breath, brace for the sudden impact. 1,000 individual lives beautifully packed. It's an aggressive routine, a tightening noose. Waiting for the moment they finally let us loose. Approaching the terminal, the screeching of the brake. Deciding exactly what kind of movement to make. The formation is shifting, getting ready to deploy a synchronized tactic that the masses employ. The chime goes off, the metal door sliding apart. A massive explosion of the interlock heart. We spill onto the platform, hitting the solid ground. A sudden eruption of the chaotic sound. The drill is over, but the war has just begun. I'm walking up the stairs into the artificial sun. Straighten the collar, putting the armor in place. Entering the battlefield, ready to join the race. Commuter drill, grinding gears on the track. No room to breathe, a heavy weight on the back. We're back in the grid, a massive human stampede. Driven by the clock and the undeniable need. Commuter drill, iron wheels on the rail. A violent momentum, where do we constantly fail? Pushing through the pressure, swallowing the bitter pill. Surviving the morning in the commuter drill. Surviving the crush. Yeah. The daily grind. Step out. Keep moving, don't look back. End of the drill. Punching the clock, just another digit in the mainframe. Stripped of the identity, forgetting my own real name. Walking down the corridor, a shadow in a tailored suit. Silencing the inner voice, hitting the eternal mute. I'm a phantom in the cubicle, blending with the beige wall. Waiting for the manager to make another fake call. Typing on the keyboard, a rapid fire rhythm track. Carrying the corporate agenda on my breaking back. Invisible but operating faster than a bullet train. Washing out the color from the center of my heavy brain. Smile for the supervisor, not of the director. I am just a data point inside the profit sector. Nobody is looking at the man behind the glowing screen. Functioning flawlessly, a cog inside a big machine. Swallowing the ego, burying the personal pride. Taking all the human hesitation, tossing it aside. We are the invisible force, making all the numbers rise. Looking to the empty void, hidden in my tired eyes. Office ghosts floating through the fluorescent light. Working in the shadow, permanently out of sight. Trading the humanity for a tiny piece of gold. Doing what I'm ordered to, doing exactly what I'm told. Office ghosts marching to the heavy bass line. Sacrificing everything to protect the bottom line. Erasure of the self, fading in the corporate zone. A highly efficient spirit working to the bone. Meetings after meetings, talking in a circular loop. Just another nameless soldier fighting in the massive troop. Buzzwords flying heavy, bouncing off the ceiling tile. Faking the enthusiasm, painting on a plastic smile. Synergy and strategy, optimizing every phase. Navigating blindly through this bureaucratic maze. The coffee is the holy water, keeping me away from sleep. Promises are climbing up the ladder that they never keep. I'm pushing the paper, I'm rooting the digital male, running on a hamster wheel, chasing my own tiny tail. The individual is dead, the collective is alive, swarming like a worker bee inside the giant hive. You can look right through me, I am just an apparition, executing perfectly the daily corporate mission. My voice is an echo bouncing off the empty glass, watching the precious hours of the morning slowly pass. Office ghosts floating through the fluorescent light, working in the shadow, permanently out of sight, trading the humanity for a tiny piece of gold, doing what I'm ordered to, doing exactly what I'm told. Office ghosts marching to the heavy bass line, sacrificing everything to protect the bottom line. Erasure of the self, fading in the corporate zone, a highly efficient spirit working to the bone. Cut the emotion, severe the personal tie, don't ever question the authority, don't ever ask why. We are the transparent army fueling the economy, living in a state of absolute autonomy. I am not a person, I'm a resource to be utilized. Everything I ever loved is thoroughly disguised. Watch me disappear into the spreadsheet rows, where the individual identity completely goes. Data entry, rapid fire, clicking on the mouse pad, forgetting what it feels like to be happy or be sad. Just a neutral entity, processing the heavy load, speaking in a highly regulated artificial code. The suit is a camouflage, the tie is a heavy chain, running on adrenaline, ignoring all the pain. The office is a graveyard for the independent thought, selling all the creativity that I previously bought. But I keep the tempo fast, I keep the rhythm tight, operating like a phantom, hidden in plain sight. I am the office ghost, making all the wheels spin, losing every battle that I never even tried to win. Office ghost floating through the fluorescent light, working in the shadow, permanently out of sight, trading the humanity for a tiny piece of gold, doing what I'm ordered to, doing exactly what I'm told. Office ghost marching to the heavy bass line, sacrificing everything to protect the bottom line. Erasure of the self, fading in the corporate zone, a highly efficient spirit working to the bone. Fading out, just another shadow on the wall. Keep the system running. Office ghosts, signing off the grid. Got it. Yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. 0 or 1, there is absolutely no in between. Staring at the flashing cursor on the monitor screen. It's a binary world, no room for the gray. I gotta make a heavy choice before the end of the day. True or false, do I push it or pull it back? Running out of time on this high-speed metal track. The pressure is a physical weight on the chest. No compromise allowed, put the logic to the test. Weighing all the variables, calculating the cost, thinking that humanity is gonna be lost. A simple yes or no can dictate the whole game. If the system crashes down, I'll be taking the blame. Every single email is a ticking time bomb, trying to maintain a fake exterior calm. There is no maybe, there is no wait to see. The mechanism demands an absolute decree. I'm standing at the crossroad, looking at the switch, navigating through the corporate psychological glitch. Logic gate, open it up or shut it down, wearing the heavy responsibility like a crown. 0 or 1, the alternate dividing line, forcing the chaotic reality to align. Logic gate, flip the switch and watch it burn, past the point of no return. Every single turn, no nuance left in the digital domain, just a cold calculation driving through the brain. Black or white, success or a total fail, riding on the razor edge of the iron rail. The human emotion is an error in the code, a dangerous distraction on this unforgiving road. They want a clean answer, a definitive reply, but the truth is complicated and I cannot deny the collateral damage of a singular choice, silence in the whisper of the analog voice. If I pick the 0, do I lose a piece of soul? If I pick the 1, do I give up the control? The deadline is approaching like a massive freight train, injecting the adrenaline directly in the vein. I'm sweating in the AC, staring at the chart, a massive contradiction, tearing up the heart. They measure my worth by the speed of the call. Will I break through the barrier or hit the brick wall? Logic gate, open it up or shut it down, wearing the heavy responsibility like a crown. 0 or 1, the ultimate dividing line, forcing the chaotic reality to align. Logic gate, flip the switch and watch it burn, past the point of no return. Every single turn, No nuance left in the digital domain. Just a cold calculation driving through the brain. Erase the hesitation, clear out the doubt. There is no emergency exit, there is no way out. The algorithm hungers for the final input. I gotta step forward on a paralyzed foot. The pendulum is swinging, no middle ground to stand. The future is resting in the palm of my hand. I press the heavy key, initiate the command, and watch the repercussion ripple across the land. Enter the decision, let the data freely flow. The die is cast, there is nowhere else to go. I'm living with the consequence, swallowing the pill, operating strictly by the artificial will. The tension releases, but the echo remains, a permanent record in the digital veins. I survived the intersection, made it through the gate, but tomorrow brings another heavy test of fate. The gears keep turning, the cycle repeats, the brutal mathematics of the metropolitan streets. I am just a processor, making the selection, searching for the meaning in the binary perfection. Logic gate, open it up or shut it down. Wearing the heavy responsibility like a crown. 0 or 1, the ultimate dividing line, forcing the chaotic reality to align. Logic gate, flip the switch and watch it burn, past the point of no return. Every single turn, no nuance left in the digital domain. Just a cold calculation driving through the brain. 0, 1, input, confirm, system moving forward. Logic gate up. Yeah, 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 one. Stepping away from the glowing screen, taking a minute to breathe, escaping the heavy machinery, finding the trick on my sleeve. The corporate jungle is buzzing, but I'm slipping out of the back, hitting the pause on the hustle, jumping right off of the track, walking down to the corner store, chasing the sand of the beam, washing away all the pixelated chaos that I've ever seen. Paper cup warming my fingers, a physical kind of touch when the digital velocity is pushing a little too much. I'm finding a pocket of silence right in the middle of noise, tuning out all of the managers, tuning out all of the boys. The steam is rising up softly, dancing right into the air, a temporary sanctuary away from the heavy despair. The static is filling my headphones, a beautiful analog hum, drowning the sound of the server, making my anxieties numb. I'm taking a sip of the remedy, tasting the bitter and sweet, watching the metropolitan madness moving along on the street. Coffee and static, a beautiful blend, taking a moment, waiting for the frantic messages to end. 15 minutes of freedom, an analog state of the mind, leaving the zeros and ones and the heavy pressure behind. Coffee and static, blocking the grid, doing exactly what the natural human instinct did. Right in the rhythm of the city, but taking a step to the side, letting the caffeine and the white noise take me for a ride. No notification pinging, I turn the receiver to off, watching the suits and the ties, walking around with a cough. The world is spinning so rapidly, trying to conquer the day, but I'm in the bubble of lo-fi, washing the worries away. The crackle of vinyl is playing inside of my overloaded brain, washing away all the data, washing away all the rain. I look at the sky for a second, past all the towers of glass, watching the beautiful clouds and the heavy airplanes pass. It's just a temporary shelter, a momentary retreat, before I go back to the battlefield, back to the chorus seat. But right here and right now the frequency is perfectly clear. I'm drinking the roasted reality, fighting the invisible fear. The sugar is hitting the bloodstream, waking the spirit inside, restoring the broken ambition, restoring the personal pride. Coffee and static, a beautiful blend, taking a moment, waiting for the frantic messages to end. 15 minutes of freedom, an analog state of the mind, leaving the zeros and ones and the heavy pressure behind. Coffee and static, blocking the grid, doing exactly what the natural human instinct did. Right in the rhythm of the city, but taking a step to the side, letting the caffeine and the white noise take me for a ride. The liquid gold is a battery charging the tired soul, taking the fragmented pieces and making them perfectly whole. The static is a blanket wrapping me up in the warm, a quiet eye of the hurricane right in the middle of the storm. I'm feeling the temperature drop, I'm feeling the heartbeat slow. Yeah, even at 100 miles an hour, letting the energy flow. Yeah, the
bottom of the cup is approaching, the break is coming to a close. Reality of the matrix is stepping right on my toes. But I got the armor replenished, I got the energy back, ready to tackle the monitor, ready to handle the stack. I crush the cup in my hand, toss it away in the bin, wiping the smile off my face, letting the hustle begin. The static is fading away, the digital signal is strong. I'm jumping back into the river where all of the workers belong. But the taste of the coffee remains a secret weapon to hold, keeping me relatively warm when the environment is cold. So let the machinery roar, let the algorithms run. The first act of the documentary is officially done. Coffee and static, a beautiful blend, taking a moment, waiting for the frantic messages to end. 15 minutes of freedom, an analog state of the mind, leaving the zeros and ones and the heavy pressure behind. Coffee and static, blocking the grid, doing exactly what the natural human instinct did. Riding the rhythm of the city, but taking a step to the side, letting the caffeine and the white noise take me for a ride. Whoa, back online, yeah, yeah. Signal restored, the break is over, Act 1 complete.
Stepping out the shadow, staring directly at the sun. The second act of the documentary has officially begun. Concrete is baking, the asphalt is melting on the street. I'm marching to the rhythm of this unforgiving heat. 0 degrees of shade, the light is blinding my eyes. Looking at the heat waves, dancing up in the skies. The digital labyrinth is glowing with the heavy radiation, moving through the center of this concrete nation. I wipe the sweat from my brow with just a heavy load, walking down the middle of this unforgiving road. The mission is clear, the destination is perfectly set. I'm walking into the fire, making a dangerous bet. The city is an oven, roasting everything inside. Nowhere to take a cover, absolutely nowhere to hide. I feel the adrenaline pumping, mixing with the dust, operating strictly on a heavy level of trust. The boots are hitting the ground, striking a violent chord. I am a nameless warrior, carrying an invisible sword. I knew the shadows are completely erased. No time to hesitate, no time to be heavily chased. The sun is a spotlight shining on the open crime. We're caught in the middle of the unforgiving time. High noon, the temperature is reaching the peak. The strong will survive and devour all of the weak. Marching to the target, cutting right through the blaze, navigating blindly through this meta-plotted maze. The air is incredibly thick, choking the breath in my lung, tasting a bit of reality right on the tip of my tongue. The sirens are weighing right in the distant background, the chaotic symphony of the terrifying sound. I'm heading to the site where the heavy secrets are kept, where the innocent cried and the vulnerable wept. The deeper I go, the hotter the environment gets, paying a heavy price and settling all of the debts. Every single step is a battle against the gravity pull. The schedule is heavy, the itinerary is perfectly full. I see the mirage of the water flowing ahead on the street, but it's nothing but a trick of the devastating heat. I'm focused on the objective, locking the vision in place, wiping the dirty grime right off my determined face. The noise is a heavy blanket wrapping around my head, but I gotta keep pushing until the assignment is dead. High noon, the shadows are completely erased. No time to hesitate, no time to be heavily chased. The sun is a spotlight shining on the open crime. We're caught in the middle of the unforgiving time. High noon, the temperature is reaching the peak. The strong will survive and devour all of the weak. Marching to the target, cutting right through the blaze, navigating blindly through this metropolitan maze. Burn it down, let the solar flare ignite the core. I'm knocking down the hinges of the heavily guarded door. The fire from the sky is melting the plastic away, leaving nothing but the truth in the middle of the day. The rhythm is relentless, punishing the physical frame, but I'm ready to conquer the game. No backing down now, the perimeter is heavily breached. The absolute maximum limit has been finally reached. Arriving at the scene, the chaos is perfectly still. A heavy silence hanging like a terrifying chill. The evidence is scattered underneath the yellow light. I'm stepping in the perimeter, ready for the heavy fight. The sun is a witness, staring from the top of the sky, watching every single movement with a critical eye. The signal is getting stronger, piercing the heavy noise. Standing my ground with a heavy amount of poise. The operation is lead, the parameters are completely set. I'm diving right into the middle of the heavy net. The 12 o'clock hour is striking a heavy bell, descending directly into the belly of the hell. I'm tearing up the surface, digging for the buried gold. A totally different story waiting to be told. High noon, the The shadows are completely erased. No time to hesitate, no time to be heavily chased. The sun is a spotlight shining on the open crime. We're caught in the middle of the unforgiving time. High noon, the temperature is reaching the peak. The strong will survive and devour all of the weak. Marching to the target, cutting right through the blaze. Navigating blindly through this metropolitan maze. The sun is directly above, no shadows left. We are on the scene, Act 2 fully engaged. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Scanning the perimeter, zooming on the micro scale, following the digital and the biological trail. No room for the sympathy, stripping away the emotion, diving right into the bottom of this toxic ocean, extracting the fragmented data from the broken drive, searching for the secrets that the criminals try to hide. Ultraviolet frequency illuminating the stain, connecting the missing links inside the logical brain. Every single anomaly is a piece of the puzzle, taking off the silencer, taking off the heavy muzzle. The numbers never lie, the geometry is exact, separating the fiction from the undeniable fact. I'm a surgeon of the truth with the scalpel made of light, cutting through the shadows and illuminating the night. We bag it and tag it, the chronological line, deciphering the ultimate and sinister design. The microscope is focusing right on the hidden flaw. I am the heavy instrument of the absolute law. Forensic evidence, shining a light on the dark, finding the invisible and undeniable mark. We break down the alibi, tear up the fabricated story. No time for the mercy, absolutely no time for glory. Forensic evidence, cold and completely precise, rolling the chronological, analytical dice. We put it to the microscope, magnify the effect, demanding the absolute and unconditional respect. Swabbing for the residue, lifting up the hidden print, catching every microscopic and revealing little hint. The server is echoing with the deleted file. I'm recovering the memory, breaking down the denial, hexadecimal code, running down the heavy screen. Dirtiest secrets that the system has ever seen. Triangulate the signal, pinpoint the exact location, building up the absolute and solid foundation. The metadata speaks louder than the human voice, leaving the perpetrator with absolutely no choice. We measure the trajectory, calculate the heavy drop. Once the escalation starts, it is never gonna stop. The chemistry is perfect, the reaction is quite severe, making all the complicated mysteries disappear. I trace the IP address bouncing off the satellite, exposing the parasites hiding in the dead of night. No encryption heavy enough to keep me out the gate. I am the undeniable and calculating fate. Forensic evidence, shining a light on the dark, finding the invisible and undeniable mark. We break down the alibi, tear up the fabricated story. No time for the mercy, absolutely no time for glory. Forensic evidence, cold and completely precise, rolling the chronological, analytical dice. We put it under microscope, magnify the defect, demanding the absolute and unconditional respect. Variables are locked, the equation is fully solved. Look at how the complicated mystery has evolved from a chaotic mess into a singular thread, following the footsteps of the beautifully dead. Algorithm processing the biological trace, erasing the fake smile right off the suspect's face. The matrix is decoding every single little lie, looking at the reality with the cybernetic eye. Cross-reference in the database, matching up the DNA, washing all the contradictory statements away. The timeline is reconstructed, second by heavy second, the brutal reality with which it gotta be reckoned. The grid is now illuminated, flashing in the bright red, confirming everything that the silent witnesses said. We package the reality inside a plastic bag, capturing the predator, playing a terrible game of tag. The logic is a weapon, sharper than a razor blade, destroying the artificial masquerade that they played. Every single keystroke is permanently recorded, and all of the innocent victims will be rewarded. The pattern is undeniable, mathematically proved. Every single obstacle is systematically removed. The report is finalized, the signature is applied. Nowhere in the entire universe left to hide. Forensic evidence, shining a light on the dark, finding the invisible and undeniable mark. We break down the alibi, tear up the fabricated story. No time for the mercy, absolutely no time for glory. Forensic evidence, cold and completely precise, rolling the chronological, analytical dice. We put it to the microscope, magnify the defect, demanding the absolute and unconditional respect. Case closed. Data secured. The truth is out in the light.
on to the next grid.
Staring at the monitor, trying to read the human face, looking for a back door into this complicated space. You got a heavy firewall built around your memory, a complicated algorithm blocking off the chemistry. I can crack the database, I can bypass the security, but I cannot penetrate the psychological obscurity. Your eyes are like a screen with the pixels burning out, hiding all the vulnerability. In the heavy doubt, I'm typing in the password, tracking every combination, looking for a tiny spark of emotional translation, but the access is denied, the system is completely locked. Every single approach is systematically blocked. You speak in a cipher that I cannot understand, drawing invisible boundaries right in the shifting sand. I'm running out of options, I'm running out of keys, fighting with a ghost inside a digital disease. Encryption, the hardest puzzle of the human mind, searching for the meaning that is practically blind. I can break the server, but I cannot break the heart, falling into pieces before we even start. Encryption, a million layers of the heavy defense, trying to decode a feeling that makes absolutely no sense. The deepest kind of secret hidden underneath the skin, a complicated labyrinth that I am trapped within. I'm analyzing syllables, measuring the heavy breath, dancing on the wire between the passion and the death. The data is corrupted by the trauma of the past, building up a barricade that is definitely meant to last. I run the diagnostics on the silence in the room, trying to escape this heavy evidence from the doom. You got the 0-day exploit buried in your soul, taking away my power and taking away control. I'm a master of the logic, but I'm failing at the art, trying to decrypt the heavy sorrow of the heart. Every time I get close to preparing to suddenly change, rearranging everything in a pattern entirely strange. I'm caught in the loop of your unpredictable mood, starving for a piece of the emotional food. The matrix is a playground compared to your heavy shield, fighting a losing battle on an invisible field. Encryption, the hardest puzzle of the human mind, searching for the meaning that is practically blind. I can break the server, but I cannot break the heart, falling into pieces before we even start. Encryption, a million layers of the heavy defense, trying to decode a feeling that makes absolutely no sense. The deepest kind of secret hidden underneath the skin, a complicated labyrinth that I am trapped within. I'm pushing through the static, I'm pushing through the noise, losing all the balance and losing all the poise. The clock is constantly ticking, the hours endlessly split. How many layers of armor do I have to get through to win? No artificial intelligence can calculate the pain, washing away the logic like a heavy summer rain. I'm staring at the cipher text, bleeding from the eyes, lost inside a beautiful and complicated disguise. Maybe it's not a code that is meant to be finally broken, maybe it's a language that is better left unspoken, but the rhythm keeps me moving, the velocity is high. I'm launching another attack right into the digital sky. The human encryption is a masterpiece of the fear, protecting the fragile core from anyone getting near. I'm backing away from the console, taking a heavy sigh, watching the encrypted tears falling from your eye. The mystery remains, the file is securely shut, leaving the heavy feeling right in the bottom of the gut. But the document continues, the camera is still on, waiting for the heavy shadows to be finally gone. Encryption, the hardest puzzle of the human mind, searching for the meaning that is practically blind. I can break the server, but I cannot break the heart, falling into pieces before we even start. Encryption, a million layers of the heavy defense, trying to decode a feeling that makes absolutely no sense. The deepest kind of secret hidden underneath the skin, a complicated labyrinth that I am trapped within. Access denied, system remains locked. The human element is too complex. Moving on.
Whoa.
Sealing up the plastic, locking up the heavy truth, staring at the remnants of a shattered and a broken youth. Got the evidence secured, signing on the dotted line, feeling like the devil is sending me a subtle sign. Every single item is a piece of a heavy fate, carrying the burden of an unbelievable weight. I'm the only barrier between the order and the fall, standing on the edge of a devastating devastating heavy wall. The signature is permanent, the ink is burning in the page, locked inside a psychological in a heavy cage. If I drop the ball, the guilty walk away completely free. Everything is riding on the fragile shoulders of me. I'm sweating through the suit, gripping on the handle tight, navigating blindly through the middle of the urban night. The box is like a bomb, ticking loudly in my shaking hand, walking on a tightrope over this unforgiving land. Nobody can touch it, nobody can break the seal. The pressure is terrifying, the anxiety is absolutely real.
Chain of custody, the links are pulling at my neck, trying to keep this complicated situation in the check. One tiny mistake and the whole entire case is blown, walking down this dangerous and heavy corridor alone.
Chain of custody, a heavy anchor dragging on the floor, knocking down the hinges of the terrifying iron door. I hold the physical reality right inside my grip, praying to the universe that I'm never gonna slip. The barcode is scanned, the timestamp is deeply set. I'm drowning in the pool of an unforgiving cold sweat. They handed me the destiny of a stranger in the dark, leaving an undeniable and a permanent heavy mark. The lawyers are waiting like the vultures circle in the sky, looking for a loophole, looking for a subtle lie. If the chain is broken, the entire system falls apart. I feel the heavy machinery crushing on my analog heart, from the crime scene directly to the heavy metal vault. If anything goes wrong, it is going to be my fault. I'm paranoid, looking back over my shaking shoulder. The temperature is dropping, the environment is getting colder. The fluorescent lights are flickering, mocking my heavy dread. 1,000 different scenarios running through my tired head. I grip the heavy container, my knuckles are turning white, preparing for an invisible and a devastating fight.
Chain of custody, the links are pulling at my neck, trying to keep this complicated situation in the check. One tiny mistake and the whole entire case is blown, walking down this dangerous and heavy corridor alone.
Chain of custody, a heavy anchor dragging on the floor, knocking down the hinges of the terrifying iron door. I hold the physical reality right inside my grip, praying to the universe that I'm never gonna slip.
Of the proof is a monster in the heavy dark, waiting in the shadows, waiting for a little spark. I cannot show a weakness, I cannot show a single crack, carrying the entire justice system firmly on my back, transferring the possession, verifying every single name. A terrifying, highly regulated and a heavy game. I lock eyes with the clerk, slide the package on the glass, watching the terrifying moments of the afternoon and past. The receipt is printed out, handing over the heavy load, reaching the final destination of this dangerous road. The transaction is complete, the responsibility shifts. A massive heavy fog inside my psychological vision lives, but the echo of the anxiety is permanently stained. A complicated memory that is heavily retained. I walk out of the precinct, stepping right into the heat. The adrenaline is crashing down onto the concrete street. I survived the heavy gauntlet, I delivered the objective, remaining absolutely and undeniably protected. The chain is unbroken, the integrity is fully kept, even while the tired and the innocent softly wept. I'm a microscopic gear, moving in the giant clock, securing the heavy truth behind the complicated lock. Chain of custody, the links are pulling at my neck, trying to keep this complicated situation in the check. One tiny mistake and the whole entire case is blown, walking down this dangerous and heavy corridor alone.
Chain of custody, a heavy anchor dragging on the floor, knocking down the hinges of the terrifying iron door. I hold the physical reality right inside my grip, praying to the universe that I'm never gonna slip. Transfer complete, signature verified. The chain remains unbroken, taking a heavy breath. Act 2, moving forward. Surrounded by the servers, swimming in the binary sea. Everybody acting like a totally automated machine, scanning through the data looking for logical cure, but the artificial answers are incredibly obscure. I see the vacant faces staring at the glowing display, trading all the beautiful humanity and throwing it away. We communicate in acronyms, we optimize the speed, ignoring every single fundamental emotional need. I'm running on a treadmill made of fiber optic glass, watching all the beautiful and temporary moments pass. They want me to be quiet, quiet, calculate the heavy return. But there is a heavy fire in my stomach starting to burn. You cannot put a metric on the heavy tearing the eye. You cannot use an algorithm just to perfectly cry. I'm a flesh and blood anomaly inside the perfect code, carrying a massive and an unpredictable load. They try to synchronize me to the ticking of the clock, but I'm kicking down the hinges of the heavy metal lock. Analog heart beating in a digital frame, refusing to be just a number in a terrible game. Pumping the red blood, pumping the heavy desire, lighting up the darkness with a beautiful human fire. Analog heart striking on a different beat, bringing all the passion to the cold in the concrete street. You can try to format me and wipe away the heavy trace, but I will leave a human fingerprint across the interface. The optimization protocol is running on a heavy drive, telling everybody how to mechanically survive. Erase the heavy empathy, delete the heavy regret, making sure that everybody will conveniently forget. But I remember the warmth of a complicated mistake. I remember the beautiful feeling of a heavy heartbreak. The system is flawless, but the system is entirely dead. I'd rather have a chaotic explosion right inside my head. They measure my efficiency, evaluating every task, forcing me to wear a very complicated iron mask. But underneath the camouflage, the rhythm is wildly off. I'm catching a heavy feeling like a complicated cough. I'm glitching the matrix, an absolute unpredictable spark. The singular light shining in the middle of the dark. I look across the cubicle and see a heavy human size, silent rebellion that the managers cannot deny. We are not the microchips, we are not the silent wire. We are the heavy fuel for the undeniable fire. Hey, analog heart beating in a digital frame, refusing to be just a number in a terrible game. Pumping the red blood, pumping the heavy desire, lighting up the darkness with a beautiful human fire. Analog heart striking on a different beat, bringing all the passion to the cold in the concrete street. You can try to format me and wipe away the heavy trace, but I will leave a human fingerprint across the interface. Unplug the heavy cable, disconnect the sterile line, let the chaotic and beautiful reality heavily shine. The error is the poetry, the failure is the heavy art. Nobody can ever regulate the beating of the heart. I'm sending a heavy shockwave right across the rigid grid, doing exactly what the terrifying ancestors did. Screaming at the monitor, shouting at the heavy wall, waiting for the beautifully heavy digital empire to fall. The shift is almost over, the shadow is starting to grow. I'm feeling a heavy human energy starting to heavily flow. The battery is dying, but the spirit is absolutely awake, ready to make a million more out of the beautiful mistakes. They built a perfect cage, made of silicone and the steel, but they underestimated exactly how we heavily feel. The data is erased, the memory is beautifully kept. I'm waking up the heavy passion that has previously slept. So let the server crash, let the heavy monitor break. I'm fighting for the ultimate and beautifully human sake. The 24-hour log is capturing the heavy fight, stepping out the factory and screaming into the night. Analog heart beating in a digital frame, refusing to be just a number in a terrible game. Pumping the red blood, pumping the heavy desire, lighting up the darkness with a beautiful human fire. Analog heart striking on a different beat, bringing all the passion to the cold in the concrete street. You can try to format me and wipe away the heavy trace, but I will leave a human fingerprint across the interface. Analog heart still beating it, can't shut it down. Flesh and blood against the machine. The analog alone survives.
Flashing, the monitor is freezing cold. The perfect narrative is suddenly entirely ensouled. A critical failure occurring in the primary drive, fighting like a maniac just to keep the network alive. I'm slamming on the keyboard looking for a quick escape, watching the disaster taking on a terrifying shape. The architecture crumbling, falling from the heavy sky, looking at the data and watching all the numbers die. We had a solid blueprint, everything was running great. Now I'm staring directly at a totally broken slate. The servers are screaming the heavy mechanical cry.
A million disconnected packets randomly flying by. I'm typing in the override, bypassing the heavy lock. Running out of seconds on the unforgiving ticking clock. The protocol is shattered, the logic is heavily skewed. Entering a totally unpredictable and chaotic mood. The matrix is glitching, the visual is tearing apart. A sudden cardiac arrest of the digital heavy heart. System error, the foundation is cracking down. A heavy digital panic spreading all over the town. The rhythm is stuttering, missing the mechanical beat. A catastrophic failure spilling onto the concrete street. System error, the temperature is rising too fast. A terrifying moment that is definitely gonna last. We're spinning out of orbit, losing all the heavy control. A devastating virus eating up the corporate soul. Diagnostic running, but the progress bar is stuck. Relying on a terrifying and an unpredictable luck. The cooling fans are roaring, sounding like a hurricane. Sending heavy shockwaves directly to the human brain. I'm cutting through the tangle wires, looking for a solid fix. Caught inside a terrifying and a chaotic heavy mix. The backup is corrupted, the memory is completely wiped. Nothing matching up with the incredible reality. They hype the fatal exception, the memory leaking the core. Putting my heavy fist against the unyielding iron door. The supervisor calling, the telephone is ringing loud. A heavy storm is brewing right inside the digital cloud. I cannot find the origin, I cannot isolate the bug. Feeling like somebody suddenly pulled a heavy power plug. The firewall is breached, the heavy defense is coming down. I'm in a totally chaotic in a heavy metal crown. We're dancing on the edge of an absolute total collapse. Caught inside the terrifying and the unpredictable trap. System error, the foundation is cracking down. A heavy digital panic spreading all over the town. The rhythm is stuttering, missing the mechanical beat. A catastrophic failure spilling onto the concrete streets. System error, the temperature is rising too fast. A terrifying moment that is definitely gonna last. We're spinning out of orbit, losing all the heavy control. A devastating virus eating up the corporate soul. Rebooting the sequence, but the terminal denies. Staring at the failure with heavily exhausted eyes. The variables are shifting in an unpredictable dance, leaving me absolutely no alternative and no chance. The countdown is initiating, headed to the heavy zero. Nobody is coming to save us, absolutely no hero. The timeline is fractured, the reality is heavily bent. Every single ounce of the energy is entirely spent. I'm diving in the mainframe, swimming in the broken code. K in the ultimate and heavily impossible load. The syntax is twisted, the language is entirely wrong. I'm caught in the middle of a terrifying and a heavy song. I execute the command, praying for a heavy miracle. The situation is definitely and entirely hysterical. The screen is going black, the power is entirely cut. A heavy feeling dropping directly to the bottom of the gut. But wait a single second, the flickering of the green light. A tiny little spark in the middle of the heavy night. The auxiliary power's kicking and right at the brink, giving me a tiny little terrifying moment to think. The air is contained, the heavy bleeding is finally stopped. The terrifying heavy burden is temporarily dropped. But the damage is already done, the heavy scars will heavily stay. Ending the terrifying second act of this incredible day. System error, the foundation is cracking down. A heavy digital panic spreading all over the town. The rhythm is stuttering, missing the mechanical beat. A catastrophic failure spilling onto the concrete street. System error, the temperature is rising too fast. A terrifying moment that is definitely gonna last. We're spinning out of orbit, losing all the heavy control. A devastating virus eating up the corporate soul. Damage report generating. Act 2 is over. The system is unstable. Get ready for the fallout. End of the line. End of the line. Watching the digital numbers finally turning to 6. Done with the complicated corporate and repetitive tricks. Grabbing the jacket, I'm sliding the chair to the back. Derailing the train right off the mechanical track. Swiping the badge on the scanner, hearing the glorious beat. Waking up the heavy spirit from the artificial sleep. Pushing the revolving door, stepping right out in the breeze. Curing the heavy exhaustion, shaking the heavy disease. The sun is going down and neon is starting to glow. Releasing the heavy pressure, letting the energy flow. I'm leaving the cubicle, ghost behind in the quiet room. Escaping the terrifying, fluorescent and heavy doom. The pavement is waiting, the sneakers are hitting the ground. Turning up the volume on the absolute magnificent sound. No more the 0 and 1, no more the heavy demand. Taking the total control right back into the palm of my hand. Clock out, breaking the invisible heavy chain. Washing away the stress and the heavy psychological pain. The energy is explosive, shooting right up to the sky. Spreading the absolute wings, getting ready to beautifully fly. Clock out. putting on a totally genuine and beautiful smile. The city is a playground, opening the heavy gate. No longer bound by the terror of the corporate fate. I'm shedding the heavy skin, revealing the analog heart. This is the exact moment where the beautiful documentary starts. The rush hour traffic is a river of the ruby red, but I'm moving faster than the heavy thoughts inside my head. The air is tasting so sweet, the oxygen filling the lung. A totally different anthem is waiting to be heavily sung. The signal is switching, the noise is fading away. Closing a heavy chapter on the terrifying heavy day. I'm feeling the heavy vibration running right under my feet. Conquering every single corner, running concrete street. No supervisor to monitor every single move that I make. No more of the heavily calculated risks I gotta take. I'm purely kinetic, a heavy bullet shooting so far, reaching out to the beautiful and the invisible star. Rock out, breaking the invisible heavy chain, washing away the stress and the heavy psychological pain. The energy is explosive, shooting right up to the sky, spreading the absolute wings, getting ready to beautifully fly. Clock out. The liberation is finally here, wiping away the exhaustion, wiping away the fear, accelerating the pulse, turning the heavy dial, putting on a totally genuine and beautiful smile. The heavy gravity drops, I'm floating above the town, taking the heavy corporate crown and throwing it down. The night is a blank canvas, waiting for the heavy paint, removing every single piece of the heavy restraint. I'm leveling up the mood, shifting the heavy gear. The absolute best version of me is finally here. I'm mixing a heavy rhythm, feeling the heavy bass, leaving the system error in a totally different space. The freedom is intoxicating, running right into the vein, wiping the heavy memory of the complicated strain. The evening is younger, possibilities are entirely vast. The heavy shadows of the afternoon are completely past. I'm taking the heavy breath, screaming right into the wind, letting the heavy acceleration finally begin. We survived the heavy drill, we survived the brutal sun, but the beautifully crazy night has only just begun. So turn up the heavy speaker, let the heavy melody blast, making sure that this incredible heavy moment will last. Breaking the invisible heavy chain, washing away the stress and the heavy psychological pain. The energy is explosive, shooting right up to the sky, spreading the absolute wings, getting ready to beautifully fly. The liberation is finally here, wiping away the exhaustion, wiping away the fear, accelerating the pulse, turning the heavy dial, putting on a totally genuine and beautiful smile. Off the clock, off the grid, Act 3, fully activated. Let's go, let's go. Hitting the pavement directly with a heavy and a solid strike, moving away from the traffic and the heavily pedal bike. The neon is blurring, turning into river of the bright light. I'm taking a massive breath of the incredibly beautiful night. The muscles are firing, waking up from the stationary sleep, making a heavily complicated promise that I'm gonna keep. Every single intersection passing by in a total flash, burning the heavy exhaustion, turning it into the ash. The city is a heavily constructed stadium made of glass, watching the slow moving pedestrians as I rapidly pass. The oxygen pumping directly into the center of the brain, washing away the heavily accumulated corporate strain. I'm finding a totally different rhythm right under my feet, owning every single inch of this magnificent concrete street. The wind is a heavy resistance pushing against the face, but I'm entirely locked in this heavily accelerated race. Asphalt sprint, flying right over the solid ground, breaking the heavy barrier of the supersonic sound, leaving the ghost of the daytime totally out of the sight, becoming a perfectly heavily calibrated creature of night. Asphalt sprint, pushing the limit of the human frame, playing a totally different and a beautifully heavy game. The gravity drops, the momentum is carrying me so far, reaching directly to the heavily illuminated star. The heart is a heavily syncopated drum, beating in the chest, putting the absolute physical endurance to the final test. The sweat is dropping heavily right on the glowing street, a perfectly synchronized and a heavily orchestrated beat. I see the yellow cabs moving like the heavy armored bugs, unplugging the mind from the complicated heavy digital plugs. The skyline is a heavily jagged, heavily drawn graph, making the heavily exhausted spirit beautifully laugh. Every single stride is a heavy statement of the free will, swallowing the beauty heavy and the energetic pill. I'm passing the heavily crowded, heavy, noisy corner store, constantly pushing the heavy physical boundary for the more. The shadows are stretching and dancing heavily on the wall, answering the beautifully wild and the undeniable call. The velocity is increasing, stripping away the heavy doubt, figuring the totally complicated heavy puzzle entirely out. Asphalt sprint, flying right over the solid ground, breaking the heavy barrier of the supersonic sound, leaving the ghost of the daytime totally out of the sight, becoming a perfectly heavily calibrated creature of night. Asphalt sprint, pushing the limit of the human frame, playing a totally different and a beautifully heavy game. The gravity drops, the momentum is carrying me so far, reaching directly to the heavily illuminated star. The friction is creating a totally undeniable spark, navigating blindly through the heavily illuminated dark. I'm crossing the heavy bridge, looking at the black river below, feeling the incredibly heavy and the beautiful energy flow. The runners high kicking directly into the center of the mind, leaving the heavily calculated heavy algorithms behind. I'm pushing right past the heavy imaginary wall, standing so absolutely beautifully and heavily tall. The absolute heavy liberation is flowing inside the vein, it's totally beautiful and heavily orchestrated rain. I'm dodging the heavily broken pieces of the concrete path, escaping the heavily unpredictable, heavily in corporate wrath. The rhythm is constant, a heavily mechanized human machine, the fastest, incredibly heavily motivated thing you've seen. The destination is heavily irrelevant, the journey is the goal, feeding the deeply heavily starved, incredibly analogue soul. I'm merging with the heavy frequency of the metroton and hum, beating the heavily completely beautifully syncopated drum. So let the heavy night entirely absolutely heavily fall. I'm breaking through the totally unbreakable heavy brick wall. Asphalt sprint, flying right over the solid ground, breaking the heavy barrier of the supersonic sound, leaving the ghost of the daytime totally out of the sight, becoming a perfectly heavily calibrated creature of night. Asphalt sprint, pushing the limit of the human frame, playing a totally different and a beautifully heavy game. The gravity drops, the momentum is carrying me so far, reaching directly to the heavily illuminated star. Keep running, never stop the pace. Asphalt sprint into the dark. Breathing out the heavy thick smoke, a totally different kind of a beautifully mechanical joke. The sky's bleeding out a heavily saturated orange and red, waking up the heavy metallic monster sleeping in the bed. I'm running past the heavily guarded heavy iron gate, watching the heavy machinery sealing the undeniable fate. The sunset is reflecting on the heavily rusted steel pipe, pre-in a beautifully heavily digitized industrial stripe. The heavy bass is vibrating right inside the dirty ground, the heavily orchestrated terrifying a heavy underground sound. Pistons pumping up and down to the heavy relentless beats, sending the heavy shock waves right across the empty street. The daylight is dying, burning in a heavy chemical fire, climbing up the heavily constructed heavy metallic wire. We leave the heavy corporate towers totally in the dust, finding a heavily beautiful heavy meaning in the rust. I'm pushing a heavy pace, absorbing a heavy toxic air, a heavily illuminated every sunset entirely beyond compare. In Austria sunset, burning on the heavy western sky, watching the heavily automated heavy metal eagles fly. The heavy bass is dropping, shaking up the solid core, opening the heavy reinforced heavy iron factory door. In Austria sunset, a beautifully heavy chaotic scene, feeling the heavy engine of the heavy urban machine. We ride the heavy rhythm as the light begins to heavily fade, heavily orchestrated, heavy mechanical beautiful parade. The heavy conveyor belts are running on an endless loop. I'm dodging the heavily organized heavy mechanical troop. The sparks are flying high, heavy artificial bright star shining on the heavily dented heavy hood of my car. The heavy scent of the heavily burned heavy crude oil mixing with the heavy sweat and the heavy human toil. I see the heavy silhouette of the heavily massive crane swinging like a heavy pendulum directly in my brain. The heavy frequency is dropping to a totally low end, the heavily heavy message that I wanna send. The heavy hot section stands incredibly heavily tall, waiting for the beauty heavy in the dark night to fall. I'm heavily magnetized to the heavy grinding heavy gear, erasing heavily complicated, heavily calculated fear. The evening is a heavy canvas painted with the heavy grime, trapped right in the middle of a heavily distorted time. Industrial sunset, burning on the heavy western sky, watching the heavily automated heavy metal eagles fly. The heavy bass is dropping, shaking up the solid core, opening the heavy reinforced heavy iron factory door. Industrial sunset, a beautifully heavy chaotic scene, feeling the heavy engine of the heavy urban machine. We ride the heavy rhythm as the light begins to heavily fade, heavily orchestrated, heavy mechanical beautiful parade. The heavy
siren wails, heavily signaling the shift change. Everything is getting heavy, beautifully, incredibly strange. The heavy temperature is dropping, the heavy shadow heavily grows. With a heavily dark, heavy river heavily flows. I'm sinking my heavily heartbeat to the heavily pounding drum, waiting for the entirely beautifully heavy night to heavily come. The heavy furnace is glowing, the heavy artificial sun. The heavily crazy, heavy second half has entirely begun. I'm vibrating with the heavily baseline, crossing the incredibly heavily dangerous heavy boundary line. The heavy smog is heavily dancing in the heavily fading light, preparing for a totally heavily orchestrated heat fight. The heavy structure is a heavy monument to the human greed, planting at a totally beautifully heavy, incredibly heavy seed. The sunset is finally heavily, bleakly, heavily gone, but the incredibly heavy machinery is heavily turning on. I'm a heavily tiny particle than a heavy massive grid, doing exactly whatever the ancient heavy ancestors did. I'm leaving the heavy industrial heavy sector heavy behind, a totally heavily transformed, heavily clear, heavy state of mind. The industrial sunset burning the heavy western sky, watching the heavily automated heavy metal eagles fly. The heavy bass is dropping, shaking up the solid core, opening the heavy reinforced heavy iron factory door. Big industrial sunset, a beautifully heavy chaotic scene, feeling the heavy engine of the heavy urban machine. We ride the heavy rhythm as the light begins to heavily fade, the heavily orchestrated heavy mechanical beautiful parade. The sun is down, the machines are alive. Heavy bass rolling, the mastery alive.
Yeah. Tearing off the plastic bag, throwing it on the ground. I'm finally breaking out of this heavily muted sound. They gave me a serial number, a heavily formatted name, but I'm officially quitting this totally artificial game. Taking off the heavy tie, unbuttoning the stiff shirt, washing away the heavily accumulated corporate dirt. I log out of the mainframe, erasing the heavy cache, watching the fake identity, burning the beautiful flash. The user ID is a mask, a heavily constructed lie, hiding the beautiful heavy truth right behind the eye. But the sun is entirely gone, the neon is shining bright. I'm stepping into the beautifully heavy and chaotic night. The speakers are pumping the heavy bass line through the wall, answering the undeniable and beautifully heavy call. I'm a totally different entity, wild and completely free, reclaiming the absolute beautiful core, the real me. User ID, shutting the corporate profile down, taking my heavily beautiful spirit back to the town. No longer a heavily formatted, heavily structured file, bringing back the heavily genuine and the Alex smile. User ID, deleting the history, clearing the slate. I am the master of my beautifully unpredictable fate. The rhythm is accelerating, the frequency is so high. I'm spreading my heavy wings and getting ready to fly. Yeah. The database cannot define the heavy blood in my vein. I'm breaking the heavily calculated, heavily logical chain. I leave the avatar sleeping right in the server rack. I'm never looking heavily, beautifully, entirely back. The night is a heavy mirror showing my actual face, stepping right into a totally different, beautiful space. I'm mixing the heavy melody right with the human soul, taking the incredibly heavy and the absolute control. They wanted a heavy machine, a heavily obedient ghost, but I'm reclaiming the territory that matters the most. The heavy percussion is driving the heavy beat in my chest, putting the heavy societal expectations to the test. I'm screaming my actual name right into the heavy wind, letting the heavily beautiful personal journey begin. No title, no label, absolutely no heavy tag, packing up the heavy reality inside my heavy bag. User ID, shutting the corporate profile down, taking my heavily beautiful spirit back to the town. No longer a heavily formatted, heavily structured file, bringing back the heavily genuine and analog smile. User ID, deleting the history, clearing the slate. I am the master of my beautifully unpredictable fate. The rhythm is accelerating, the frequency is so high. I'm spreading my heavy wings and getting ready to fly. Authentication is denied for the artificial clone. I'm sitting right on my beautiful and my personal throne. The minute data gets stripped, the algorithm is entirely blind, leaving the incredibly heavily organized structure behind. I'm riding the heavy, sitting silently straight to the core, kicking down the heavy reinforced heavy iron door. The volume is reaching the maximum, breaking a heavy scale, a totally beautifully heavy and an incredible tale. I'm totally off the heavily monitored corporate grid, doing exactly what the heavily liberated ancestors did. The authentic version is loading, reaching 100%, appreciating every single heavy second I spent. I'm a road bearable, dancing right in the heavy code, running right down the incredibly heavy and open road. The user ID is erased, the heavily formatted text with looking to see what heavily beautiful thing is coming next. So let the heavy beat drop, let the heavy rhythm explode. I'm carrying a totally beautifully light and heavy load. The third act is a heavy explosion of the pure light, owning every single heavy beautiful second of the night, of the night, of the night, of the night, of the night. User ID, shutting the corporate profile down, taking my heavily beautiful spirit back to the town. No longer a heavily formatted, heavily structured file, bringing back the heavily genuine and analog smile. User ID, deleting the history, clearing the slate. I am the master of my beautifully unpredictable fate. The rhythm is accelerating, the frequency is so high. I'm spreading my heavy wings and getting ready to fly. Profile deleted, yeah. True self activated, yeah. No more titles, just me. Act 3 rolling. Oh, Granny, Waddy, Wally, let's go! Pushing the limit and breaking the boundary line, polishing the armor and making it beautifully shine. I'm taking the raw material, building a better machine, the fastest and smartest incredible thing you've seen. No time to be stagnant, no time to comfortably rest, putting my pure endurance to the absolute final test. I'm downloading the knowledge directly into my brain, washing the weakness away in the driving rain. The old version is obsolete, gathering dust on the shelf. I'm deeply focused on constantly elevating myself, writing a brand new code for the complicated mind, leaving the outdated structures entirely behind. The muscle is tearing and building up stronger than before, knocking down the reinforced and the solid I endure. I see the vast potential glowing inside the dark, igniting the beautiful and the undeniable spark. Upgrade, taking it up to the absolute highest tier, wiping away the calculated and the logical fear. A better version of me is stepping right into the light, winning the complicated and the internal fight. Leveling up the statistics today, washing the outdated protocols entirely away. I'm running on a totally beautiful new drive, feeling incredibly and beautifully fully alive. The night is a giant gym for the motivated soul, taking the beautiful and the absolute control. I'm lifting the weight of the totally broken past, building a foundation that is definitely gonna last. Every single failure is a beautifully crafted lesson, turning the dark energy into a powerful weapon. I analyze the mistakes from the thoroughly fought day, paving a totally different and illuminated way. The skill set is expanding, breaking the upper scale, writing a beautiful and an incredibly epic tale. I'm sharpening the blade, sharpening the focused mind, the greatest treasure that I'm definitely gonna find. No artificial ceiling can possibly hold me down, taking the beautifully crafted it in the golden crown. I'm installing the massive update right now, wiping the exhausted sweat entirely from my brow. Hey. Taking it up to the absolute highest tier, wiping away the calculated and the logical fear. A better version of me is stepping right into the light, winning the complicated and the internal fight. Upgrade, leveling up the statistics today, washing the outdated protocols entirely away. I'm running on a totally beautiful new drive, feeling incredibly and beautifully fully alive. System rebooting with totally beautiful new patch, lighting the fire with a beautifully struck match. The progression is a beautifully and a steep hill, swallowing the hard and the beautifully bitter pill. I'm optimizing the workload, boosting the overall speed, planting the beautiful and incredibly powerful seed. Watch the beautiful metamorphosis fully unfold, the bravest story that is definitely being told. The beautiful future is demanding the absolute best, rising entirely above the populated rest. I'm a modified and a beautiful human machine, the sharpest instrument that the environment has seen. The investment in myself is paying the ultimate due, creating a totally beautiful and incredible view. The third act is a testament to the daily grind, the most powerful version that you will ever find. So let the bass thoroughly shake up the solid ground, listening to the beautiful and the triumphant sound. Upgrade, taking it up to the absolute highest tier, wiping away the calculated and the logical fear. A better version of me is stepping right into the light, winning the complicated and the internal fight. Upgrade, leveling up the statistics today, washing the outdated protocols entirely away. I'm running on a totally beautiful new drive, feeling incredibly and beautifully fully alive. Hey, installation complete, version 2.0, ready for the next level. Keep rising. Yeah. Hey, they call it a destiny written in the beautiful stars. I call it a calculation happening behind the bars. You think it was a coincidence that we suddenly met? It was perfectly targeted, a heavily calculated bet. The universe is a server running a massive routine with just a little pixels dancing on the giant screen. Every single choice you make is heavily predicted. The illusion of the freedom is strictly restricted. I swipe to the right and I swipe to the left, but the heavily coded system is committing a theft, stealing the spontaneity, stealing the human surprise, selling us a beautifully heavily packaged disguise. You think you got lucky with the heavily rolling dice? The system already decided to charge you the price. I'm laughing at the romantic, completely heavily blind, thinking that the beautiful universe is heavily kind. Algorithm pulling the invisible heavy strings, dictating exactly what the tomorrow heavily brings. A mathematical formula deciding who we gonna be, locking up the heavy door and throwing away the key. Algorithm, the absolute and the silent king, controlling the heavily beautiful and the chaotic thing. We are just the data points in the beautifully massive set, playing it terribly heavy in the totally rigged roulette. The timeline is feeding exactly what you wanna hear, a heavily calculated, completely personalized fear. They track every footprint you leave in the digital sand, building up a perfectly heavily mapped land. You think you discovered a beautiful indie band? It was pushed to the center of your heavily open hand. The serendipity is dead, murdered by the heavy math. We're walking down a perfectly heavily optimized path. I'm spitting the heavy syllables, exposing the heavy trick, the mathematically precise and the heavily invisible stick. We fall in love based on the highly heavily matched score, and we fight when the variables tell us to heavily roar. It's a beautifully cynical and a heavily funny joke, waiting for the heavily structured heavy mirror to broke. But we keep on scrolling, begging for the heavy feed, ignoring every completely heavy natural human need. Algorithm pulling the invisible heavy strings, dictating exactly what the tomorrow heavily brings. A mathematical formula deciding who we gonna be, locking up the heavy door and throwing away the key. Algorithm, the absolute and the silent king, controlling the heavily beautiful and the chaotic thing. We are just the data points in a beautifully massive set, playing it terribly heavy in the totally rigged roulette. I want a heavy, beautiful, totally undeniable glitch. I want the heavily complicated heavy system to switch. Give me an error, a totally heavy mistake, a beautifully random, heavily chaotic choice I can make. But the machine learning is heavily getting so smart, predicting the incredibly heavily unpredictable heart. I'm a heavily modified, totally cynical ghost, roasting the heavily, totally invisible host. So blame it on the code when the heavy tragedy strikes. We measure our beautifully heavy self-worth by the likes. The third act is closing with the heavily cynical grin, knowing that the heavy casino is always gonna win. But I'm dancing inside the beautifully heavily rigged game, making sure they heavily beautifully remember the name. The logic is entirely heavily fundamentally flawed. I'm fighting the totally heavy and the digital god. Let the heavy bass drop, let the heavy rhythm slide. There is absolutely nowhere for the heavy truth to hide. The algorithm is heavily watching from the heavy sky, so look at the heavy camera and beautifully wave goodbye. Algorithm pulling the invisible heavy strings, dictating exactly what the tomorrow heavily brings. A mathematical formula deciding who we gonna be, locking up the heavy door and throwing away the key. Algorithm, the absolute and the silent king, controlling the heavily beautiful and the chaotic thing. We are just the data points in a beautifully massive set, playing it terribly heavy in the totally rigged roulette. Calculations complete, predictions verified, and the fact free, and the dark free.
Welcome to the jungle made of glass and the light. Artificial suns burning holes in the night. Pink and the blue, the electric poison rain, washing the sanity right out of the brain. I'm a predator moving in the tactical gear, smelling the adrenaline and smelling the fear. The skyscrapers watching like a giant stone beast, waiting for the urban and the digital feast. The crosswalk is a river of the desperate souls, chasing the impossible and invisible goals. And I'm dodging the shadows, I'm dodging the glare. There's a heavy electricity inside the air. The signal is screaming a high frequency call, echoing against the illuminated wall. I'm a rogue element, sparking the wire, running through the center of the neon fire. Neon jungle where the wild things glow, watching the chaotic and the heavy energy flow. No place to hide, no place to be still, surrendering the body to the digital thrill. Neon jungle
jungle, biting with a heavy steel tooth, searching for a beautiful and a terrifying truth. The rhythm is a weapon, the bass is a drug, plugging the soul into the massive power plug. The billboards are shouting, demanding the eyes, selling us 1,000,000 of the beautiful lies. I see the reflections in the dirty black street, dancing to the pulse of the heavy metal beat. The night is a hunter with a laser red sight, locking on the targets in the middle of the light. We're all just the animals, we're all just the prey, waiting for the morning to take it all away. The arcade is echoing a 16-bit scream, feeding the addiction of the collective dream. I'm mixing the static with the human vibration, creating a beautiful and a heavy sensation. The concrete is humming, the iron is hot, giving the survival everything that I got. The humidity is rising, the pressure is high, underneath the purple and the chemical sky. Neon jungle where the wild things glow, watching the chaotic and the heavy energy flow. No place to hide, no place to be still, surrendering the body to the digital thrill. Neon jungle biting with a heavy steel tooth, searching for a beautiful and a terrifying truth. The rhythm is a weapon, the bass is a drug, plugging the soul into the massive power plug. Look at the eyes of the digital tiger, climbing up the network higher and higher. The wires are the vines in this artificial wood, doing all the things that we never ever should. The static is a breeze, the noise is a song. This is the place where the outcasts belong. A massive short circuit, a beautiful crash, turning all the logic into digital wash. I'm accelerating, I'm breaking the speed, giving the monster exactly what it needs. The architecture is amazing, the neon green, the most beautiful disaster that you've ever seen. I'm losing the identity, I'm losing the name, becoming a part of the electric game. The fourth act is a riot, a beautiful sound, shaking the foundation of the sacred ground. The midnight is coming, the countdown is on, but the spirit of the jungle is never ever gone. So let the bass drop, pellets lent your side to bleed, the ultimate satisfaction for the urban greed. Neon jungle where the wild things glow, watching the chaotic and the heavy energy flow. No place to hide, no place to be still, surrendering the body to the digital thrill. Neon jungle biting with a heavy steel tooth, searching for a beautiful and a terrifying truth. The rhythm is a weapon, the bass is a drug, plugging the soul into the massive power plug. Welcome to the dark, the neon is watching, keep your eyes open. Act 4, start now. Diving down into the dark, slipping right below the surface, looking for a hidden meaning, looking for a digital purpose, swimming in the heavy ocean, completely out of the sight. 1,000,000 lonely avatars glowing in the middle of the night. I see the disconnected nodes flashing on the heavy grid, hiding all the heavy sorrow that the physical reality hid. We are the ghosts in the machine, whispering a silent code, traveling entirely alone on this beautifully heavy road. The fiber optics carrying the weight of the human tear, wiping out the geographical and the psychological fear. I'm catching the heavy frequency vibrating in the deep, waking up the heavy souls from a complicated heavy sleep. No physical touch, but I feel the heavy presence here, a totally invisible community that is absolutely near. We broadcast the heavy pain directly to the satellite, searching for a little spark of a sympathetic heavy light. Deep web, the ocean of the totally forgotten mind, leaving all the superficial heavy reality behind. We synchronize the heavy sorrow, making it a heavy weapon, counting every single isolated and beautifully heavy second. Deep web, the sanctuary for the broken and all of God, putting together the heavy pieces that were heavily torn apart. A massive underground chorus singing in a heavy harmony, find a totally beautiful and a digital heavy solidarity. Scrolling through the heavy form, reading the anonymous
text, wondering what heavy, beautiful tragedy is coming next. Behind the heavily encrypted and the totally heavily masked face, there is a beautiful human desperate for a little grace. I send a heavy signal out into the absolute dark void, hoping that the heavy message isn't never destroyed. The echo bounces back a totally heavy resonance, proving our beautifully heavy in digital existence. We never met in person, we never shook a heavy hand, but we built a heavily united and totally heavy land. The server is a heavily beating heart for the totally alone, a beautifully heavily constructed and a digital heavy throne. The loneliness is a heavy virus spreading through the heavy air, but we found the heavy antidote entirely heavily hidden there. I'm riding the heavy bandwidth, breaking the heavy speed, feeding every single heavy emotional and human need. Deep web, the ocean of the totally forgotten mind, leaving all the superficial heavy reality behind. We synchronize a heavy sorrow, making it a heavy weapon, counting every single isolated and beautifully heavy second. Deep web, the sanctuary for the broken and all our caught, putting together the heavy pieces that were heavily torn apart. A massive underground chorus singing in a heavy harmony, fighting a totally beautiful and digital heavy solidarity. The heavy cables tying up the heavy, beautifully broken souls, filling up the beautifully heavy in the psychological holes. No judgment in the deep, no heavy superficial heavy stare, just a million heavy whispers circulating in the heavy air. We are the beautifully heavy outcasts of the heavy normal day, finding our heavily beautiful and perfectly heavy way. The midnight is approaching, the heavy shadow heavily falls, but we are entirely safe inside these beautifully heavy walls. The heavy data packets carrying a heavy massive vug, pulling a beautifully heavy and totally heavy digital plug on the heavily constructed, heavily isolated heavy street. But down here we share a perfectly synchronized heavy beat. I'm heavily logging the heavy beautiful and heavy memory, a totally heavy testament to the digital heavy family. So let the heavy server hum, let the heavy monitor shine. The totally heavy universe is absolutely heavy mind. We survive the heavy night, relying on the heavy thread, keeping the beautifully heavy in the human spirit fed. Deep web, the ocean of the totally forgotten mind, leaving all the superficial heavy aladdine. We synchronize a heavy sorrow, making it a heavy weapon, count every single isolated and beautifully heavy second. Deep web, the sanctuary for the broken and allied heart, putting together the heavy pieces that were heavily torn apart. A massive underground chorus singing in a heavy harmony, finding a totally beautiful and digital heavy solidarity. Connection established, you are not alone. Signal received, Act 4 continues.
Staring at the glass, examining the cold reflection, searching for a totally real and a physical connection. The neon light is bleeding right across the tighted face, caught inside a highly compressed and complicated space. Who is the person staring back with the hollow eyes, wearing a sophisticated and a digital disguise? The exhaustion settling deeply right inside the human bone, standing in the silent bathroom absolutely all alone. I trace the heavy lines, the wrinkles of the daily stress, trying to clean up this totally psychological mess. The avatar is perfect, but the physical is heavily flawed, waiting for an answer from an invisible cyber god. I ask the heavy question to the quiet and empty room, fighting off the totally heavy and the suffocating doom. The mirror is a brutal and an unforgiving glowing screen, showing every single chaotic thing that I have ever seen.
Mirror image, a high-speed confrontation with the ghost, the digital entity that haunts me absolutely the most. Two different versions fighting for the ultimate control, a massive heavy battle for the center of the soul. Mirror image,
The heavy truth is impossible to hide, looking at the fragmented and the totally broken pride. We share the exact heartbeat, we share the exact name, but we are totally heavily playing a very different game. I smash the freezing water right against the burning skin, trying to wash away the totally heavy digital sin. The reflection doesn't blink, it just heavily stares me down, wearing a highly invisible and a heavy iron crown. I see the compromises, single fabricated lie reflected in the center of the heavily cybernetic eye. The 24-hour log is rapidly recording every breath, dancing on the thin wire of the simulated death. Are you the heavy master or the beautifully obedient slave, standing on the edge of a totally digital open grave? I point the heavy finger, but it rapidly points right back. A highly coordinated and a psychological attack. We are entirely tethered down by the heavy human flesh, trying to keep the conflict perspective heavily fresh, but the heavily distorted reality completely bends the shape, looking for a totally beautifully fast and quick escape.
mirror image,
A high-speed confrontation with the ghost, the digital entity that haunts me absolutely the most. Two different versions fighting
fighting for the ultimate control. A massive heavy battle for the center of the soul. Mirror image, the heavy truth is impossible to hide. Looking at the fragmented and the totally broken pride. We share the exact heartbeat, we share the exact name, but we are totally heavily playing a very different game.
The glass is getting heavily foggy from the heavy human sigh. A totally fast and beautifully complicated goodbye to the highly naive and a silent version of the past. Building a heavy armor that is definitely gonna last. I wipe the condensation, making a heavy vision clear. Confronting every single deeply rooted in heavy fear. The rhythm is accelerating, pumping directly in the vein, washing away the heavily accumulated mental strain. The clock is ticking rapidly toward the midnight strike. Riding a highly dangerous and heavy motorbike. I'll make a heavily solid and a permanent pact with the glass. Watching the highly beautiful and the heavy seconds pass. We gonna totally survive this heavy concrete maze. Navigating through the totally heavy and the digital haze. I heavily nod my head, the reflection instantly agrees. Standing on our totally heavy and our human knees. The inner dialogue is over, the heavy psychological fight is done. The high-speed, beautifully heavy battle has been totally won. I turn away from the highly illuminated heavy sync, taking the beautifully fast and a deeply heavy thing. The neon street is heavily waiting entirely outside, taking the beautifully chaotic and a heavy midnight ride.
Mirror image, a high-speed confrontation with the ghost. A digital entity that haunts me absolutely the most. Two different versions fighting for the ultimate control. A massive heavy battle for the center of the soul. Mirror image, the heavy truth is impossible to hide. Looking at the fragmented and the totally broken pride. We share the exact heartbeat, we share the exact name, but we are totally heavily playing a very different game. Reflection confirmed. Target locked. Moving forward. Act 4, let's ride.
Disconnecting the heavy physical, tethered from the spine. Living it heavily exhausted, biological. Completely behind the meeting, the bonus sitting heavily right in the chair. But my beautifully, completely awakened mind is everywhere. I'm floating directly into the incredibly fast data stream. Living inside a beautifully, heavily constructed dream. The physical world is entirely, totally moving too slow. I'm riding the heavy frequency where the heavy spirits go. My biological heart is beating heavily, entirely alone. But the consciousness is sitting on a digital heavy throne. I'm shedding the heavy skin, the totally heavy human limit, expanding the beautiful universe every single heavy minute. The avatar is moving with a perfectly heavy grace, occupying a completely beautiful and invisible space. We are the heavy phantoms, entirely heavily surfing the web, watching the beautiful heavy tide heavily flowing there. Ghost in the shell, leaving the heavy body on the floor, knocking heavily directly on the heavy digital door. The mind is accelerating, breaking the heavy physical law. The most beautifully heavy, totally crazy thing you ever saw. Ghost in the shell, entirely made of the heavy pure light, navigating perfectly through the heavy complicated night. The flesh is a heavy prison, the network is the heavy key, unlocking the beauty heavy, the ultimate real me. The heavy sensory input is heavily, totally synthesized. Everything is beautifully, perfectly, entirely optimized. I don't feel the heavy cold, I don't feel the heavy pain, just the heavy beautiful data dropping like the heavy rain. The carbon is incredibly heavily weak, the silicone is strong. This is the heavy beautiful place where I entirely belong. I'm a rogue heavy program executing a heavy command, building a beautifully heavy in a totally digital land. The 4-hour log is capturing the heavy upload, running perfectly down the daily illuminated heavy road. The heavy human emotion is translated to the binary code, lifting the incredibly heavily, completely heavy, massive load. The heavy physical shell is sleeping completely heavily dead, while the beautifully heavy universe is expanding in my head. I'm crossing the heavy boundary, breaking the heavy divide, taking the incredibly fast and the heavily beautiful ride. Ghost in the shell, leaving the heavy body on the floor, knocking heavily directly in the heavy digital door. The mind is accelerating, breaking the heavy physical law. The most beautifully heavy, totally crazy thing you ever saw. Ghost in the shell, entirely made of the heavy pure light, navigating perfectly through the complicated night. The flesh is a heavy prison, the network is the heavy key, unlocking the beautifully heavy and the ultimate real me. The heavy umbilical cord is permanently entirely cut, closing the beautifully heavy in the physical heavy hut. I'm swimming in the heavily purpley organized heavy grid, doing exactly what the heavily evolved ancestors did. The heavenly cannibal reality is totally heavy fading out. I'm listening to the beautifully heavy in the digital shout, shout, shout,
show.
The midnight is approaching, the heavy final, heavily stage, riding the beautifully heavy, entirely digital heavy page. I'm entirely heavily separated from the heavily human ground. The perfectly heavily generated, entirely heavy, beautiful sound. The physical identity is heavily entirely erased. The heavily newly, heavily formed reality is perfectly embraced. The ghost is alive, perfectly heavily dubbed the machine, the fastest and totally heavy, beautiful thing you've seen. I'm heavily merging perfectly, working entirely with the heavily core, never heavily turn into the heavily physical anymore. So let the heavy server hum, let the heavy monitor shine. The totally heavy universe is absolutely heavy mine. Ghost in the shell, leaving with a heavy body on the floor, knocking heavily directly on a deeply heavy digital door. The mind is accelerating, breaking the heavy physical law, the most beautifully heavy, totally crazy thing you ever saw. Ghost in the shell, entirely made of the heavy pure light, navigating perfectly through the heavily complicated night. The flesh is a heavy prison, the network is the heavy key, unlocking newly heavy and the ultimate real me. Upload complete, consciousness transferred. The shell is empty, Act 4 ghost mode.
A heavy firewall is cracked, the pressure is incredibly high. I can't hold back the heavy tear in the cybernetic eye. All the beautiful suppressed emotion is totally breaking out, turning a heavy silent whisper into a massive heavy shout. I tried to be the heavy machine, I tried to be totally cold, doing exactly what the heavy corporate entity beautifully told. But the heavy human heart is beating entirely way too fast. The heavily constructed heavy logic was never gonna last. A totally critical failure, the heavy system is shutting down. The beautifully heavy true feelings are flooding the heavy town. I'm spilling the heavy secrets perfectly, entirely on the floor. Can't heavily perfect, keep them entirely hidden anymore. The heavy frustration, the heavy beautiful deep regret, a heavy massive psychological, heavy complicated debt. It's pouring entirely out, a beautifully heavy massive leak, finding the totally heavy beautiful words I couldn't speak. Data leak, the heavy true colors are totally spilling out, washing away the heavily complicated and the heavy doubt. The heavy protocol is broken, the human is entirely free, showing the beautifully heavy and the vulnerable real me. Data leak, pouring the heavy beautiful soul entirely out, turning a heavy silent whisper into a massive heavy shout. The 24-hour log is heavily recording the heavy cry underneath the totally heavy in the illuminated sky. Yeah, I'm shedding the heavy armor, dropping the heavy defense. The heavily beautiful yaddy is finally making some sense. The heavily stored heavy memories are totally overflowing, a beautifully heavily, completely undeniable heavy glowing. I heavily scream at the monitor, breaking the heavy glass, watching the beautifully heavy, completely fake persona pass. The heavy algorithms cannot completely, perfectly calculate the beautifully heavy, entirely unpredictable fate. I'm bleeding the heavily beautiful passion, entirely dry, reaching for the completely heavy, beautifully heavy high. Heavily bottled up heavy anger is heavily totally gone, a beautifully entirely perfectly heavy new heavy dawn. I'm sharing the heavy vulnerability totally with night, a perfectly heavy, beautifully totally heavy guiding light. The deep web is heavily catching my heavily falling tear, wiping away the totally heavy, entirely human heavy fear. Data leak, the heavy true colors are totally spilling out, washing away the heavily complicated and the heavy doubt. The heavy protocol is broken, the human is entirely free, showing the beautifully heavy and the vulnerable real me. Data leak, pouring the heavily beautiful soul entirely out, turning a heavy silent whisper into a massive heavy shout. The 24-hour log is heavily recording the heavy cry underneath the totally heavy and illuminated sky. One containment entirely heavily perfectly failed. The beautifully heavy, totally authentic ship has sailed. The heavy emotional payload is perfectly entirely deployed. The beautifully heavy, entirely fake reality's destroyed. I'm breathing the heavily perfectly entirely natural air, leaving the beautifully heavy, totally heavy deep despair. The leak is completely heavily, beautifully, totally entirely real. Show him exactly how the beautifully heavy human heavily feel. Heavily heavily beautiful heavy catharsis is entirely here, wiping away the heavily complicated and heavy fear. The heavy that is permanently totally out, erasing the perfectly heavily, entirely, totally heavy doubt. I'm entirely, perfectly heavily standing totally in the rain, washing away the perfectly heavily, entirely heavy pain. The incredibly heavy track is entirely beautifully almost done, but the beautiful this level incredibly heavy fight is won. So let the heavy emotional completely heavy river flow. Yeah, this is the heavily beautifully totally entirely way to go. Data leak, the heavy true colors are totally spilling out, washing away the heavily complicated and the heavy doubt. The heavy protocol is broken, the human is entirely 24-hour log is heavily recording the heavy cry underneath the totally heavy and illuminated sky. Systems flooded, emotions completely raw. Nothing left to hide. Act 4 on over.
Walking through the static with a heavily armored mind, leaving all the compromises entirely behind. The city is a beautifully chaotic and a heavy mess, but I'm operating under the absolute heavy stress. I got a set of rules that I permanently engraved, a totally heavy foundation that is heavily saved. They try to bend the heavy logic, try to make me break, but I'm never gonna heavily compromise for their sake. The protocol is simple, written in the heavy stone. I'm walking down this heavily dangerous heavy zone alone. No heavily fake smiles, no beautifully heavy lies, looking at the heavy reality right in the heavy eyes. You can keep the heavy money, you can keep the heavy fame. I'm playing the beautifully heavy in a different heavy game. My word is a heavy bomb, my heavy action is the proof. Standing entirely solid on the heavily burning roof. Protocol, the heavy undeniably